today we're going to be talking about historic brands, their downfall, a little bit of their history, and what you guys think about the future of outdoor gear, outdoor brands, whether it be ones that are currently existing or the unknown. So I think we're going to go ahead and start with the main topic, and that's Ontario Knife Company, because they just recently announced that they're closing the doors after over 100 and some years of time, and they're pretty trusted even today in the campcraft bushcraft community. They're affordable, they're cheap, they're expendable. You can give it to a kid as their first knife, and you're not going to break the bank, but it's still good quality steel. So, what are your guys' initial impressions of this company closing down doors?
Yeah, I tell you, I don't know much about Ontario Knife Company, but I see it as a continuation of a trend that's been going on for 40, 50 years now. The first outdoor industry company to do what they were calling at that time offshoring product was, I believe it's the North Face. Don't quote me on that, but it's one of those brands. The competition in the 1970s for camping gear was fierce. You had new people coming out all the time with new packs, new sleeping bags, new this, new that. And there were a lot of manufacturers, a lot of cottage manufacturers. The business was pretty dispersed, and the prices were high. And what the North Face did is they took advantage of the opening of China to commerce and started having their products made overseas. This gave them a tremendous price advantage over some of the other manufacturers. And, just like anything else, all of the other manufacturers started offshoring their product. I think it's dribbling down now to companies like Ontario Knife, which doesn't service as big a clientele as, say, the backpacking, numbers of backpackers. So it's just taken 40 years for that trend to get there. And which is why the larger American corporations are offshoring product. Although I believe in this case, they've been bought by a foreign company. Is that true?
From my understanding, that they're closing shop completely. Like, they are done. Now, I don't know if it's going to be like Woolrich, where they closed down in 2018. An Italian company took them over, and then they fully, nixed it. I'm not sure of that 100%, but I know that the New York branch is closing. Okay. Even the orders, I think, are shutting down.
Yeah. Now, it may be that what's happening to them is what happened to the Woods Corporation, where in I believe the 80s or 90s, they closed up shop, but then they were bought by a Chinese company. And now you can still buy Woods product. It's just they're not manufactured in New York or Canada anymore. All of the design and development and manufacturing is done overseas. And the Woods product has suffered accordingly. So, again, I think talking about Woolrich might be able to give me and Nathan a bit more to talk about than Ontario Knife. Because, like I said, I'm not a big knife guy. I've got one good knife and two pocket knives, so I don't need to go that far.
I make all of my own, so not an issue.
That's pretty handy. Do you own any Ontario knives?
I think we have one that we use as a deer butchering and kitchen sort of knife, but I think that's the only one. I don't have a hunting knife or anything like that.
What about you, Sarge?
Nothing from Ontario Knife. I've got well, wait a minute, hold on a second. Old Hickory. They're not Ontario Knife, are they? That's my
that's Ontario.
Okay, well then I've got an Ontario Knife.
Yeah. See, that's what killed me, because I've got a whole set of old hickory butchering knives that I inherited from my grandmother or my great grandmother. I don't know, but man, the steels. It's like I'm not a big steel guy. I'm not a big knife guy. Nathan, you probably know better about steel since you make your own. But as far as sharpening and keeping it sharp, like it does a great job. So I'm a little disappointed in the closing of the company. Oh, that being said, this knife that I did a review on my channel, I bought for my son because he's getting first class in the Scouts. It was not up to the same quality that I had hoped and expected. So maybe that was one of the nails in the coffin, the quality itself.
I think that's kind of across the board, that there's a lot of decline in quality even among American companies, and it really boils down to whoever's in charge of the company and whoever's in charge of creating the products. The responsibility is on them, because Americans can make a terrible product and Chinese and Indian companies can make excellent products. It's just that usually the company in America that's sending something overseas to be done says, I want this as cheap as possible because I want to sell a lot of them and make a lot of money with having a low price product. And the low price leader, that's what they're going for. And as a result, the quality goes down, but that could happen in America just as easily. We just haven't seen as much of that prior to now. But I think that lately I've been disappointed in some American made products lately and surprised at it. So I think that there's some of the, let's cut some corners and save some bucks so we can compete with the overseas stuff. And as a result, the quality suffers everywhere. And it really boils down to companies need to take a little more pride in their brand name and produce something good. And there are some companies that are still doing that, but it seems like overall there has been a decline in the quality of all products across the board.
I will say this though, as regards that, in China or some of these other, we tend to use China as a whipping boy, but Korea and other places are just as probably do this. They can cut wages. In this country, we can't. They can cut wages and they can cut manufacturing processes. We can only cut manufacturing processes. We have laws in this country that govern the lowest amount of wage and how long somebody can work during a week before they get time and a half and that kind of thing. That's almost a fixed cost these days. So if you are competing against somebody who is selling a product of roughly the same or slightly lower quality than what you have been doing historically, the only place you can cut to bring your price down is in manufacturing processes and quality control.
Right.
So go ahead.
Which as a result, it means that if an American company is going to reduce their price of a product, they're going to have to cut quality. Right. And so that may be why we're seeing more of this from, big name brands that even 20 years ago were the best, and they're not anymore. To put it into perspective on a totally different scale, I recently was shopping around for a quality guitar, and I picked up a Gibson guitar. And Gibson, if you're a guitar player, that's the best, one of the best. And I was shocked, and I thought it's got to be just this guitar. So I picked up another one. I actually played like 6 of them, and they were all terrible. And it's still an American-made product, but it is. There's guitars coming out of China that are 100 times better than a Gibson today, and it's not just that one product. I've seen it with household appliances and things that used to be great and they're not anymore. So I think this is kind of just a thing that's happening now, and companies like Ontario Knife Works. Sean, you mentioned that the knife wasn't quite what you thought it should be. And people react to that. And, the last knife I bought from Ontario wasn't any good, so I didn't buy another one, or maybe it wasn't as good or something, so I didn't buy another one. And that hurts the bottom line on the company. And unfortunately, they don't realize they're doing this to themselves. But but that's the end result. So the one good side to all that is it does give the opportunity for those who still do a quality product to reap that benefit.
I agree, and what I am seeing, personal observation, got absolutely no facts to back it up, but what I'm seeing is it looks as if, at least as far as the outdoor products industry goes, that in this country, we are going back to smaller manufacturers, possibly local and regional manufacturers like there were in the 1920s.
And the internet helps that. I said,
Yes.
and the internet helps that.
Yeah. In the old days, it used to be where the train went determined where you were going to buy your product. Now it's where the wires go. So a guy like you, Nathanael, and myself in the past, we can get our product. I used to go to a gun shows to sell militaria. And I would go there because I knew that at the Houston Astra Hall, I would get 60,000 eyeballs walk across and look at my table on any given weekend. And out of those 60,000, 30,000 people that go by, 5 or 6 of them will stop and buy something from me. Today with the internet, I can get 60,000 eyeballs looking on my product in a day. And if 5 or 6 people buy from me every day, well, then I can make enough money perhaps to keep the wolf away from the door. So, yeah, you are absolutely correct. And the fact that a lot of our corporations got too big. And when you get real big, we go back to cutting costs and we got suits at the top instead of innovators and designers in charge of the product. I go back to Dick Kelty. He maintained creative control and ownership of his company from 1952 until 1972. And I just found out the only reason Dick Kelty sold his company to, I forget who it was, but it was a large corporation. The only reason he did it is because he was having a hard time getting financing from the banks to expand his company and to get material for his product. Okay, that was the only reason. That was the only way he could continue to expand his business and serve his customers the way he had been serving them for 20 years. But a thing to learn here, I think, is that where I was going earlier, we're going back to cottage manufacturers. If you look at the hammock camping industry right now, it is served almost entirely by cottage manufacturers, people who are currently the size of companies like LL Bean and Eddie Bauer were in the late 30s. Okay, just right on the edge of exploding. My hope is that it stays that way. Okay. I would like to see, at least in our industry, as it affects us, but I think it'll affect other places, going back in this country to smaller, more manufacturers of smaller size, owned by people who do their own design, who do their own innovation, and do their own production to service as many customers as they possibly can to the highest level they possibly can. Okay. I know personally some guys I have asked in the hammock camping industry, I've asked, don't you want to buy more sewing machines? And no, I'm doing just fine. And if I sell any more product than what I'm selling now, the quality will go down. Okay. That's where I think we're going. I think we're going back to that kind of ethos. At least I hope we are. Did I make any sense?
Yeah, I think we're at this point in American history. Due to the American wages, we have outpriced ourselves because human cost is definitely the most expensive cost. In 2020, we saw, how employment was affected. because of COVID and people coming back to work and things like that. But that's just the truth of the matter. If you're answering to shareholders and, like you said, people in the suits, and you got to keep making profit, at some point the parabola is going to peak, and there's going to be things that's going to suffer from the result of it. And that's a sad point, especially for historic brands, I think, whether it be knives or clothing or anything else. It kind of scares me, because I like being able to go to these historic companies, not only go on their website and find the history and you see the lineage, but you can expect a certain level of quality there. You may still have to pay for it, but there's that certain level of quality that you're not going to be disappointed with.
There's definitely something to be said for a long reputation in the industry, no doubt about that. But, a lot of these companies have also moved on, and they don't make the same product that they did 100 years ago. I know LL Bean has recently re-released some of their original patterns and things and started remaking some of the stuff that they made 100 years ago, which is great. I love to see that. But, there's a lot of, like, you can't go to Abercrombie and Fitch and get a holster rig. So, some of these companies, they're just a name. There's nothing else there anymore. And so, we've got that. And then for me, I like to use the period gear as much as possible. And I don't have any objection to using an original knife or an original gun or, anything like that. I've got original fishing poles, because there's not a lot of wear and tear that goes on to those things. If you're taking care of them and you're treating them properly, using them is the best way to keep them going, especially with automobiles and lanterns and cook stoves. Anything that runs off of gasoline does better if it's used regularly. And that's the better way to preserve it. So I don't have any objection to any of that. Now, when it comes to using original things in the field that can be damaged by use and wear, such as fabric or leather items, that kind of stuff, I feel bad using original stuff in the field, because when this stuff is used up, it's used up. And, the early 20th century, 1923 was 100 years ago. And so you can walk into an antique mall and you can find all kinds of things, maybe getting to be a little less now, but you can still find a lot of things that are 100 years old, and they're usable.
Right.
And back in the 1960s, when Civil War reenacting started, that was the thing. You would go to the antique store, or you'd find so-and-so down the road, and you'd buy their old Civil War uniform and you'd wear it out there on the battlefield, and they got used up. And so with the smaller companies that are coming up now that are starting to reproduce the items that were made 100 years ago that would have been worn out, those smaller companies, they care about the quality because they don't have the reputation. They haven't been in business for 100 years. And so making a quality product is priority number one to those guys, at least most of them. Some of them are just turning stuff out, unfortunately. But there are a lot of them. I would say the majority of them are people that they really care about a quality product, because they're not going to get another customer if they don't put out a quality product. And if you're going to live the life and try to get the full 20th century experience, you need to have the clothes, you need to have the leather gear, you need to have the boots and shoes and whatever else, holsters and whatever you need. Those things, you don't want to wear out the original ones. So you need people that are producing good quality, usable reproductions. And the nice thing is that those are growing by leaps and bounds. I'm amazed at how much is coming out. I'm getting ready to do a video here real soon where I'm going to review a whole bunch of pants, because pants are one of the hardest things to come up with in this hobby. And so
I have mine on, by the way.
Yeah, I do too. I know we don't have to, but we do.
As there is a trend right now, has been for a few years, of large corporations buying up what they're calling heritage brands. Okay. I mentioned Woods a while ago, or there's it was bought up by a Chinese company to sell cheap Chinese good with the Woods name on it. And then you mentioned Abercrombie and Fitch. Well, that was the name was bought by a company that wanted to sell fashion with weird pictures. Eddie Bauer. Eddie Bauer is no longer in the camping gear business. It's fashion, and it's high end fashion. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Recently, an Italian company bought the name of Jerry Mountain Gear from Jerry, the company Jerry Cunningham founded in 1947. They're a fashion brand. As a matter of fact, it seems that many of the older brands grow to a point to where they start selling more fashion than they do gear.
Probably
And
stay
when
relevant.
yeah, there's more profit in fashion than there is in gear, and the standards of excellence, let's say, in manufacture is not as high in fashion as it would be for gear. You buy gear, you expect it to last for a couple of years. You buy fashion, you expect it to last until
Right.
the next fashion trend comes out, which is probably going to be in a year. Uh, so that's something that's going on in the industry. The names will live on, and again, this may happen to Woolrich, which is already essentially a fashion brand, in a very specialized kind of fashion. But we may see the Woolrich label, the Woolrich name, on more trendy fashion gear that may include plaid. You know, the same thing happened to the sleeping bag, the one that be Jaeger sleeping bags. Okay, Jaeger started out doing some outdoor products. They ended up doing high end fashion in Great Britain. All of it made out of camel hair, like the sleeping bag was. But they ended up making fashion, just like Eddie Bauer and Jerry and Abercrombie and Fitch. So I'm not necessarily saying that all outdoor brands are going to end up selling undies and jackets, but uh, there is a trend to buying heritage brand names, and then because of what we talked about, the 100-year-old history of quality and name recognition. In other words, they're paying for the names so that they can drape themselves with the clothing of the guy who died 50 years ago. Uh, so
Right. Right.
Well, and
uh,
this is nothing new because remember that Americans 100 years this was going on 100 years ago in a different format. The European aristocracy was running out of money, and Americans were the new money, and they were marrying European aristocracy to get the title because they didn't have the title but they had the money. And it's the same idea. I mean, it's just we're doing the same thing. So I see where you're coming from on that for sure, and it's nothing new.
yeah, but it's I had an interesting conversation. I don't know, Sean. I think you may be a member of the Vintage Backpacking group on Facebook. I don't know if you are, Nathaniel.
Mm-mm.
The great thing about that group is it's populated by names from the manufacturers of camping gear in the 70s and 80s. The guys who founded Sierra Designs and Wilderness Experience, all those guys are there. And I'm fixing to have some conversations with two fellows who worked directly with and for Dick Kelty. I may do one of these Zoom calls with them. I've got a few things I've got to get finished before I approach them with it. What he was saying is that he recently did a hike on the John Muir Trail, and he saw more different brands of backpacks than he has ever seen before. Now, this is a guy who came up in the 1970s at the time when there was Kelty and Jansport and World Famous and Camp Trails and about 10,000 different Japanese brands of backpacks running around on the trails. And now he's saying he can't he doesn't recognize the brands that he's seeing on the trail. And then I showed him the pack I have that I use that was custom built by Chris Zimmer at Zimmer Built. And he says, oh, great. Another name of a backpack I'd never heard of before. So this is a thing that gets me thinking that the industry is going to go back to more smaller manufacturers, more regional, more cottage guys. I think we will always have cottage manufacturers because there is always a market for well-designed, well-constructed gear.
Right.
Okay, by people who value that, as opposed to the people who only want to get a tent that the kids can sleep in at the state park this year for summer vacation. And we'll get another one next summer if we need it. The guy who's going to go to Alaska or, hike the John Muir Trail or Benton Mackay or something like that, he's going to look for higher quality gear. And he's having an increasingly hard time finding it from the big names because of the offshoring and the cost cutting that we've been talking about. I know that when I make something, when I made my World War I stuff, I concentrated on getting it right and selling it. I mean, there's a lot of times, and Nathanael, I know you will sympathize with, I felt like I was losing money. But I was selling a quality product, which made me feel better about losing money, I think. I'm not sure. But, I think we're going to go there. And I think what will happen is another washing out, okay, where the better quality cottage manufacturers will grow, and the guys only looking for beer money will disappear. And then they'll grow into big corporations. Or what usually happens is a large corporation will see one of these smaller corporations, see the potential for profit, and buy it, and then proceed to kill it using accounting. Jansport is an excellent example in that. The guys at Jansport came up with the design for a dome tent, but they had been bought out by a ski company, a company that produced skis and ski wear. And they brought this idea to the president of the company because now they no longer had direct control over their product. And the president of the company says, nah, we don't want to get involved with that. And they got involved in book bags instead. Okay. And then the North Face took over the dome tent market, and everybody suddenly had to have a dome tent. Jansport could have made $1 kajillion if the suits had only listened to them, because they knew what their customer wanted. And as a result of them, from the 70s, I'll say, selling out to the man, as a result of that, the man didn't make the profit he could have because he didn't listen to the right people. He listened to his accountants. Okay. So I think we're going to see that cycle repeat. It's difficult to study as far as camping gear is concerned. I don't know how many companies from the 20s and 30s went out of business because of this effect that I'm talking about, or because of the Depression. If you look at the video I did about the compact tent, I talk about how they had a problem with an Army contract, but I'm not sure that's what killed the company. And they went bankrupt 10 years. They went into receivership 10 years after the end of the First World War. I'm quite sure that incident had an effect, but I don't think it was the proximate cause. I think there was probably mismanagement or, not being able to read the market. because you got to know that you got to be able to read the market. Dick Kelty did that. Have you ever, Sean? You and I have talked about this. I'll ask Nathanael. Nathanael, have you ever seen the movie Ford versus Ferrari?
I've only seen bits of it. I haven't seen the whole movie yet.
There is a magnificent scene in there where Lee Iacocca is trying to sell the board of directors of Ford Motor Company on the concept of the Ford Mustang. Okay, and he opens the meeting by saying, "We are trying to make an automobile that we can sell to the first generation of American teenagers with money in their pockets." And what he's doing, he's talking about the baby boomer teenagers. Lee Iacocca was able to read the market. The market at the time was, for the very first time in human memory, teenagers, parents had enough money to give to their children because of the effects of the Second World War. We can get deep into that. But it's reading the market. And that's, Ontario Knife, Woolrich, it's possible that they were not able to read the market. The market for knives, for outdoor knives, is no longer as big as it was in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, even the 60s. Okay. I could go, when I was a teenager, before I was a teenager, late 60s, early 70s, those years, I could go into any store, any department store, any hardware store, any sporting goods store, any Army surplus store, and there would be sheath knives for sale of varying quality and varying price. But every store had a display of knives and pocket knives. You're not going to see that today. If you go into, and the department store is dying out, but if you go into a department store, you're not going to see a display of knives. You won't see one in a hardware store. You used to go to a hardware store and there would be a bunch of hunting knives and hunting equipment in the hardware store. So the market has changed, and that may have been what happened to Ontario Knife. Woolrich has probably suffered from a reduced number of people hunting, and the fact that blaze orange works better in the woods during hunting season than red plaid does, in order to announce. And many states, of course, have mandated blaze orange, where before, when I went hunting, it was the Pennsylvania tuxedo that everybody wore. You had to wear that to go deer hunting, and now you have to wear blaze orange. So it's not quite as important to buy a Woolrich hunting suit. We sit here and we talk about how terrible it is that things are going to China and stuff like that. But at the same time, we may not be reading the market.
Okay. Well, I would love to invite you guys
That's
to come
fair.
out to the backwoods of Indiana sometime, because Indiana is a great place to live, because the hardware store up the road has two, not one, but two of the best knife displays you'll ever see. Plus, they have a whole stack of them on the counter that you can buy for $5 as you walk out the door. And also, Indiana only requires blaze orange on top of your head, nowhere else. So I'm going to wear my Pennsylvania tuxedo this year.
It cost me to consider. You've probably done it, looking for heritage fabric so that you can make a new reproduction, and how expensive heritage fabric is, as opposed to modern blends. As far as like Woolrich is concerned, and the reason why they may have had their troubles is there aren't near as many sheep being raised in this country as there was 100 years ago. And that means the supply doesn't quite meet the demand, and you have to start buying your wool from overseas, as opposed to wool that has been grown here in this country, much like the down industry in the early 20th century, after market hunting was, the states had put the kibosh on market hunting for down. so that probably hurt Woolrich is the cost of materials as well as the cost of labor that we talked about earlier. So that's another factor we should look at is particularly with fashion or gear brands that rely on fabric, particularly more exotic fabrics, more exotic than cotton, like wool or linen or silk for that. And of course, we never grew silk in this country, but fabrics like that. Okay, in that the agricultural cost has gone up so high that the farmers and ranchers are no longer producing that. So there's not quite as much supply inside this country. And again, I think that's another thing that will devolve to smaller manufacturers, and it's a larger number of smaller manufacturers, which may be where the market is going on that. So Nathanael, you gave me a kernel of thought. I turned it into a piece of popcorn.
So I found this list of defunct companies, and Abercrombie and Fitch is on there. But I thought I'd read off some of them, just so if any of you guys recognize any of these names. All right, so you guys ready?
Yep.
Let me know if you've heard it. Say yay or nay. Laytok Mountain Gear.
New one on me.
No. Nope. Integral Designs.
Yeah.
You have heard of that one?
I have heard of that one, but I wouldn't be able to swear exactly what it means, but the name rings a bell.
So this one's a Dana Design, another
Dana
backpack
Design,
company.
yeah.
Yeah.
Dana is actually still in business. Okay, it's just the name has changed. That's Dana Gleason, I believe. Brilliant man, but he's never going to make any money in the ultralight backpacking business. He makes heavy haulers.
Back to some Trapper Nelson methods.
Even heavier. Okay.
Oh.
We're talking giant packs. In the special operations field, the military of most nations will allow their special operations units to buy their own gear or equip the company or platoon with gear they access outside of normal channels. Dana Design, Mystery Ranch. Okay, Dana Designs is now Mystery Ranch. And Mystery Ranch and London Bridge Trading, and there's a few other that are in the what you might call the tactical category of stuff. But Mystery Ranch makes big, heavy hauler packs. I don't do heavy hauling anymore.
I don't either.
But they're beautiful. Oh, you can look at that and you can say, yeah, that thing can carry a Volkswagen up a mountain. And just I have ceased my need for carrying Volkswagens up mountains. But no, yeah, Dana Designs is defunct, but reborn as Mystery Ranch.
Gotcha.
And it's one of those cottage manufacturers, one of them companies that Dana Gleason, I believe, I think I got his name right, Gleason. I'm probably wrong, but I think he's right. He's one of those guys that says, I don't want my company to get any bigger than it is right now, because if I do, the product won't be as good. Okay, so yeah, no, I've heard of Dana Designs. Yes, hit us with a couple more.
This next one, Moss Tents. Moss Tents, I've heard of.
Yeah, one of the big names. Bill Moss called himself a fabric artist. He was not a gear, but yeah, he I don't know if you watched my video on who made the first dome tent, but there's a good argument for Bill Moss designing the first commercial dome tent design for camping, okay, in the United States. If you haven't watched my video, go out and watch it right now. Well, after this thing. But yeah, no. Yeah, I don't know why Moss went out of business, other than the fact that his crap was real expensive, and it still is. Somebody recently posted a Moss tent, an eBay auction for a Moss tent, and it was like $800 in the vintage backpacking group. And somebody said, "Don't laugh. There's somebody out there who's going to pay that much for that thing." I haven't looked at it, but I'm pretty sure somebody will. I had initially, I thought I had snuck into a deal on a tarp he made called the Paravane. I thought I had snuck in and was going to be able to buy one real cheap. It had set on the auction for a week at like $45, and with one bid. And I went in there and, I creeped in on puppy dog toes so I could snipe that thing at $50 in the last 30 seconds. And, the timer hit 30 seconds. I put in my bid of $50. Got a reply right back, says, "You have been outbid." And I looked at it and it was $450. So yeah, the Moss stuff commands big dollars in the collecting community, but I don't recall why they went out of business.
Nate, have you heard of Moss tents before?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've run across it here and there, but I'm not real familiar with their products.
Okay.
Hit us with another one.
The next one's Early Winters. I've never heard of that one.
There was a guy named Bob Gore, or Bill Gore, who had designed a new fabric, and he was going around to all sorts of manufacturers getting them to buy his fabric. Early Winters was the only company, a small company out of Seattle, I think, and they made tents and sleeping bags and high quality stuff. They bought his fabric, and the reason why they bought his fabric is it was breathable and waterproof. Today we call it Gore-Tex. Okay. Early Winters was the first company to buy the Gore-Tex material, and they made tents out of Gore-Tex because they knew that the primary thing about tent design was that it has to protect you from moisture, but it also from rain, but it also has to get rid of the moisture of your body.
Right.
And so they had a waterproof, breathable material. So yeah, the reason why Early Winters went out of business, I'll tell you this. They had bought a big order of fabric, and it had made a bunch of new products. And in those days, the best way to sell your product was to show up at the Outdoor Products Expo. I believe that's what it was called. And that year it was here in Houston. And they came with tables full of product. And the idea was that manufacturers and buyers would visit all of it kind of like the SHOT Show is today. They had some catalogs printed up, and they never arrived. So here they are in the place where they're going to, attract all of their business, and they have no catalogs. And so they were stuck with not being able to sell anything because nobody knew about their product and having a whole bunch of product on hand. That's why Early Winters went out of business.
That's a shame.
Yeah, it's kind of synopsized. They made excellent stuff. I've got an Early Winters sleeping bag and an Early Winters bivy bag. One of the first bivy bags made out of Gore-Tex. I'll be doing a video on that shortly.
So the last one, there's a bunch more, but the last one I'll mention is Camp 7. Have you guys ever heard of Camp 7?
Camp 7, yeah. Camp 7 was kind of a mixture between, the business model of a lot of the companies, Kelty was one, was to have a storefront and a catalog and to sell product in sporting goods stores like REI and things like that. And Camp 7 was one of those companies that had that business model. is considered good gear, but yeah, they went out of business, and I don't know why. It's one of those things from a collector standpoint. I considered buying some Camp 7 stuff, but none of it is earth shaking as far as design and development. It's basically reiterations of somebody else's product, like the thousands of Kelty clones that we saw in the 70s. You know, everybody had aluminum frame backpack, that kind of thing. So they weren't making anything new, but they were making what everybody else was making at about the same price and about the same quality, and they probably weren't able to break out from the crowd as much as they wanted to. It was a name that was, a little bit more well known than, Joe and Martha's ski shop in Vail, Colorado, or something like that. But yeah, one I'll hit you with here in a couple weeks in a video is a company called Adventure 16. A16. Wait for that video. Sit by like the kitty cat that ate the cheese. With bated breath.
All right, so this is a lightning round, if you will. So I want you guys to think about and speculate your top 3 outdoor companies, and it doesn't have to be one that's been around for like ever, but it would be really cool if you did. But what are the top 3 outdoor companies that you can think of that will probably not last another 100 years? What do you guys think? I will shoot out one. You mentioned it already, Woods. I don't think Woods will last another 100 years. Pretty disappointed and sad.
Definitely, yeah. Well, technically speaking, Woods no longer exists.
Yeah.
They the iteration of Woods today, probably won't be around for very much longer because the quality sucks. Okay, it's basically putting a high quality name on cheap Chinese gear. So this is a difficult one because I concentrate on historic brands, and everything new I buy, and I don't buy much because I make a lot of my own gear. And we're in a period like what Jim Thompson said, that all of a sudden he saw, packs that he'd never heard of, and then there are dozens of them. This is hard for me to say because all of the historic brand companies don't exist anymore in the form in which they were originally started. And as far as backpacking camping products have been taken over by either brands. Well, all right, let me just throw one out there so I can throw one out to give you an idea of the kind of cheap stuff. And that's Ozark Trails.
Yes.
That's Walmart's house brand. Okay. It's a big name. Everybody has Ozark Trail stuff because 99% of the people who actually go camping these days are the type I talked about before, where they go to Walmart, buy a tent for the kids so they can go camping this year, and next year they'll buy another cheap tent. Ozark Trails is that kind of thing. But I don't think they'll be around. I don't think Walmart will be around in 100 years. I don't think any company that relies on brick and mortar will be around in 100 years.
That's a fair point.
So there's mine, Nathaniel.
Hey.
Well, just Ozark Trail was the one I was going to mention, but in that same vein as Sears and Roebuck only lasted a little over 100 years, and I'm sure that Amazon is going to go that way eventually too. There's you can only reign supreme for so long, so maybe in 100 years there'll be something else that people will be using besides Amazon too. But like I said, Ozark Trail was the one I was going to mention as being gone. I would like to say that it's hard for me to say what I think will be gone. It might be easier for me to say what I think will remain. Okay. And looking at the impact on the outdoors community. I think that, LL Bean will probably survive for at least for a while longer, maybe not another 100 years, but at least for a while, because they've got that name and they've kind of stuck to it. I mean, LL Bean stuff is still pretty darn good today. It may not be as rugged outdoors gear as it used to be. I mean, it is still good. It's just that it's more fashion oriented now than it used to be, but they still make some good stuff that you can take hunting. And then I had another one. Man, it's awful getting old.
I just don't want to hear about that from you. I got what, 40 years on you?
Probably.
Okay.
No, you probably don't have that much because I'm going to be 40 this year. So
I got 40 years on you.
Oh man, you're older than I thought you were. That's you look young for your age, man.
Well, yeah. I just don't feel that way when I wake up.
Right. Neither do I.
Yeah,
so yeah, I can't think of what
Pendleton?
The other one was.
You guys think Pendleton will be around
Pendleton
for another 100 years?
You're talking about Pendleton woolens?
Yeah.
I don't think there are going to be any heritage, just to throw them in that bucket, any heritage, any brands that use heritage fabrics. Okay.
I disagree with that. Honestly, I have a friend in Nebraska who she started out with some neighbors that were raising sheep, and she started spinning by hand and got to be so much demand that she has purchased a building and some machinery and actually restored I want to say 19 teens wool carding machine. She's working with a bunch of different farms right now, and she's processing a lot of wool out of her little cottage factory in Nebraska. So, there's the industry is slowly climbing back. We actually have a massive sheep operation just about 10 minutes up the road from us, and they've started leasing out extra pasture all across the area. And everybody's, all the farmers around here are now leasing their pastures to this huge sheep farm. So, the industry, there's enough demand for it. And if there continues with that trend, we've got, I've got a brother-in-law who I tease him about being a hipster because he's all into, natural fibers and hiking barefoot and stuff like that. He was absolutely thrilled to find out that U.S. Rubber Company is making a vintage style, kind of a Converse style sneaker, but instead of canvas, it's got Pendleton wool. And so he thought that was just the greatest thing since sliced bread, and he's intending to order a pair. I just told him about him last weekend, and he was all excited about it. So, and these are not necessarily the people like us that are into vintage camping, vintage hunting. Right. These are, ordinary folks that just like something that's different and maybe a little higher quality. And so I think there's, and the other thing is that there is nothing like wool. There is nothing that can be made out of plastic that is going to have the same characteristics and qualities as wool. And people are realizing that. There is a huge trend walking away from synthetic fibers and synthetic fleece because it doesn't do the same thing. And if you roll into the fire in the middle of the night, you're going to burn up. And wool is not going to burn that way. It's not going to melt onto your skin. So I think there's always going to be a market for traditional natural fabrics, heritage fabrics. Maybe not in the exact same patterns that, we like, and are historic. You might not see as much buffalo check, although honestly, over the last few years, buffalo check has been pretty trendy. My wife got me a little thermos that has buffalo check printed around the outside of it. I love it. But anyway, it may not be buffalo check. It may be a more modern multicolored flame stitch or something like that, but it's still heritage fibers. It's still natural wool or natural cotton. I'm impressed by the trend towards natural cotton socks. I can find cotton socks almost everywhere, and and I'm finding wool socks more and more. Oh, that was the other company I was going to mention that I thought might stay around because of their flexibility and their ability to straddle the line between serious outdoorsman and fashion. Is Cabela's Bass Pro. They're kind of the same company now, but I think they're probably going to carry this torch forward into the future because they know how to flex with the culture and the various entities that are interested in their products. So, I think they'll stick around for a while and like them or hate them, whatever. But they're there, and sometimes they're the only place that has what I need. So they have
That's a
wool
good
socks.
point, man.
Well, that's kind of where I was going with it, Nate, I think that corporations that operated on the scale of companies, corporating like Pendleton and Woolrich, will be gone. Okay. And we will, as I said before, we're going to start seeing a lot of a whole bunch of smaller manufacturers. There won't be corporations that use heritage fabrics that dominate the market the way that they did up until about 30 years ago. Okay. Back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s, everybody had a wool blanket. I mean, everybody. You could walk into any home in the country and there would be a wool blanket in there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
These days, you're not going to find that many brand new wool blankets in every home in the nation. Okay. You're going to find a cheaper substitute that works and that has a performance factor that is not as high as a wool blanket would be. Okay. But it was cheaper. And their heater works better than they did 100 years ago. Right. So again, it's a matter of scale. There, like you said, there will always be a market for goods made from heritage fabrics and goods made in a heritage manner, if you will, for want of a better term. But to have corporations as big as that, if you look at the Kenwood Company, okay, there was a time when the Kenwood Company dominated the wool blanket business. Everybody had to have a Kenwood blanket. Okay, they sold more blankets than Pendleton or Woolrich ever did. Okay, part of that was cost. So, but they went out of business at about the same time synthetics started coming on the market for sleepwear. Ski wear, okay, that's one of the biggest segments of the outdoor product market today is in ski fashion. Okay, you're just not going to see the slopes in Vail and Colorado and New Hampshire and Vermont. You're not going to see people wearing wool out there in any numbers. You're going to see the continued use of nylon and waterproof, breathable fabrics, and that's.
I think maybe in situations like skiing, yes, where you're going to be laying down in the snow a lot. Mm-hmm. But as far as sporting, hunting, and fishing is concerned, I'm really impressed. And this has all been in the last really less than a year that this is really taking off. But I'm starting to hear from non-reenactor people, non-living history people, but serious hunters about things that I've been saying it for years. They've always made fun of me for going out and hunting in my wool coat and things like that. But as it turns out, there's now a huge trend towards hunting in wool and doing lots of things in wool. There is a company called Smart Wool, and they make wool.
I got a bunch of their socks.
Yep, I love their products. They make socks. They make long underwear. They make regular underwear. They make summer underwear out of wool, and it's very comfortable stuff. So wool is absorbent. It wicks moisture away naturally. It's like wearing Under Armour, but it's not synthetic. It breathes better. You don't get overheated as easily with it. And now There's companies that are starting to work on like wool hunting coats that have a mossy oak pattern print on them. So you can actually get mossy oak style hunting camo in wool now, which, I mean, a year ago you couldn't. This is all brand new coming to the market because people are realizing all of a sudden with the new interest in wool, and you know, you can thank the hipsters for that because they got that ball rolling, but the new interest in wool and the fact that it's more sustainable, it's healthier for the planet, it's going to biodegrade in a matter of a couple of years back to the earth, whereas your synthetic fibers are not going to do that. I always get a little irritated when I hear somebody talk about, you know, vegan leather or synthetic wool. It's plastic. It's plastic. It's petroleum products. That's what it is. And it's going to last for 3,000 years. Long after you quit wearing it, no one else is wanting to wear it either. It's going to still be here. And wool is not like that. Wool is going to rot and turn back into the earth in a couple of years. And so at least my generation and younger generations are looking at it that way more so than as a heritage thing. It's that wool is sustainable. Wool is better for the planet. And so they're starting to wear it. Well, now they start doing that and they realize, oh, hey, this stuff actually works better than the stuff that my parents wore. And maybe grandpa was onto something. Maybe it wasn't that his stuff was old and outdated. Maybe we just thought this was better and it really isn't. So we're going back to the old stuff. And they're taking that and improving upon it with fabrics like Gore-Tex included. You know, I saw a wool hunting coat, camo wool hunting coat with a Gore-Tex liner, and it was just a prototype, not on the market yet. But I mean, it was pretty cool looking. I mean, it wasn't what I would want to wear in the woods because I don't like the camo look personally. But hey, I'm sure it's going to work really, really well, and somebody's going to be really happy to have it on a cold winter's day when they're out there hunting. So, you know, yeah, I think it's going to come back around. I really think that we're going to see, especially in the next 20 years, we're going to see a lot more wool products hitting the market, and as a result, cotton as well. And hemp is becoming a big thing. At first, it was just the hippies that were wearing it, but really, I mean, hemp has taken the market by storm, and I've bought a few things that are made from hemp and just been thoroughly impressed with them. Of course, nothing compares to hemp rope. Hemp rope is the best rope on the planet. There is nothing made that is better than hemp rope.
Amen.
But I've been impressed with. I got a hold of some hemp canvas and kind of a Russia sheeting sort of heavy canvas, and I made a pair of pants out of it. And at first, it's stiff as a board, but it washes so soft. And that pair of trousers is like the most comfortable blue jeans that you've worn for years. But the amazing thing is you can't wear that stuff out. I mean, they're a pair of 1812 trousers, and I've crawled all over creation in them and been through the woods and camped in creek beds and all kinds of stuff. And, you know, really put them through the ringer, and they've never even needed to be patched. Still just as comfortable and just as strong as ever. So I think that, you know, people and you know, people are in a situation now where, especially in my generation, where the mortgages are much bigger. The student loan debt's huge. You can't even buy a car for less than $30,000 or $40,000 now.
That's why there's a new engine in my truck instead of a new car in my garage.
Right. So we're looking at how can we make our dollar stretch further, and buying a better quality product is going to do that. And so that's driving the push towards things like hemp and wool, because hemp wears very, very well. It's harder than anything to tear up. And wool is very good too. Wool stays looking nice longer than most other fabric, even synthetic fabrics. It doesn't get that pilling factor that fleece gets, synthetic fleece. Even your polyester blend sweatshirt is going to get those little balls on it, you know, the pilling factor, and look shabby after a couple of years. And wool, if it's taken care of and you keep the moths out of it, it's going to still look just as good 100 years later as it does today. So I think there's always going to be people that are going to demand that. And I think that we're going to see a huge increase in those products in the next 20 years.
Well, gentlemen, I think this is a good place to kind of close it up. It ended on a positive note. We talked about the closing of Ontario Knife Company, and here we are talking about the positivity of the future of retro materials, possibly retro styles. You know, what is old is always new again. You know, it's always cyclical. So, and I think it's also good that you guys both mentioned that, yeah, a company will close, but in the end, there's always somebody that takes its place. Like you said, the cottage industry, and we still have like was it Green River Knives? You know, they're kind of the Ontario Knife Company compatriot, if you will, or whatever. They're side by side. Duluth Pack. I don't know if they'll be lasting another 100 years, but they got Frost River that is comparing right next door to it, and it's a small company. So I don't know, gentlemen. Do you think? Do you have a positive outlook on outdoor gear and overall?
I think as long as people keep camping, there's going to be a need for outdoor gear, and I don't see camping ever going away. We've been doing it for thousands of years, so I think it's going to last.
There's a distinction I make, and I do it a couple times on the channel, and the term was coined in the 60s. Is a difference between consumer level and expedition level. Okay. Consumer level camp is Ozark Trails. Okay, that's consumer level camping gear. And as long as people are car camping, as long as people are going out to the state park instead of through hiking the Appalachian Trail, that segment of the industry will always be very large. Okay. There is another segment of the industry, and you mentioned hunting. One of the things we have to factor in is that the percentage of the population that is actively involved in hunting is diminishing. Okay. So that's got to be factored in. The number of people who are doing what used to be called expedition level stuff, what I call backcountry camping, through hikers on the developed trails, guys, mountaineers and that kind of thing. That segment is not diminishing, but it's not growing as exponentially as the consumer level stuff is. And that was the segment that I believe Ontario Knife occupied, whereas Woolrich occupied the big business end. Okay, the thing everybody had to have, kind of like the Ozark Trails. Okay, and I think the good thing for those people who do that kind of camping, backcountry camping, that we are going to go back to, and I see this as a good thing, that we're going to go back to the type of manufacturing and design that we saw in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. Smaller companies making higher quality goods.
Okay. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, those people are not going to disappear. Okay.
Me too.
The Japanese or the Chinese company used to be, when I was a young man, it was the Japanese, not the Chinese. The Chinese and other offshore companies, they are going to service the car camping, the state park camping industry. Okay. And there's going to be so many of them that they're going to be at each other's throats. Okay. This will probably devolve to the benefit of those people who are out there doing that type of consumer level camping, because the prices will go down, even though they're insanely low today. You know, the temptation is to go to Walmart and buy a $29 tent and take it into the backcountry. Okay. That's a bad idea, but there's temptation there. And there are people who are going to do it, and they're going to learn their lesson, and then they're going to go to some other cottage manufacturer. But yeah, that I see that as a positive trend and that is because in the history of camping gear, the expedition level, the backcountry level type of camping always trickled down to the consumer level. Okay. For instance, dome tents were designed with the mountaineer in mind. Okay. You needed a tent that had tension, that wouldn't collapse under snow. It was breathable and easy to carry. And now everybody is using dome tents to go to the state park. It's a product that was designed for climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and going up Everest. But now it's used for going to the state park to cook weenies. So,
Interesting side note on that. I saw I was about 2 weeks ago, I was at Devil's Tower in South Dakota. And as I was walking the trail around the base of Devil's Tower, I saw something odd up in one of the trees, probably about 30 feet up. And it was an Ozark Trail dome tent that was shredded and stuck up in the top of the tree. Lord knows how long it's been there or how long it'll remain to be there. But yeah, just interesting, funny side note there.
There's a photograph I've been trying to find for about the past 10 years. It was in the back of a backpacking magazine that I saw, like I said, back in the 70s. And probably taken by a guy who, some old guy who didn't want to use these dang blasted dome tents. It was a picture of a dome tent hanging in the air after it had blown off the top of the Half Dome in Yosemite. So you've got this beautiful vista of Half Dome, and you've seen that picture, but in the air coming down from it is a dome tent that had been blown off the summit. So I've seen that kind of thing. That's the problem with domes. That's why a hammock camp. You're not going to see a hammock flying around in the air. It might flap in the tree a little bit, but it's not going to go. We're not going to get altitude. But yeah, no, I do see a rosy outlook. When these companies go out of business, I don't see it as really a terrible thing. It's, if you want to get philosophical about it, it's the circle of life. Okay. I mentioned compact tents a while ago. They made the first 4-pound tent, 3 3/4 pounds. That's a decent weight for a tent today. They did it 100 years ago. Okay. They didn't last. Okay. The people who are making 2 and 3 pound tents today, they're not going to last either. But it's going to be because somebody made a better product, or somebody made the same product more economical. So actually, I see it as a good thing. Where did everybody go?
We all abandoned you, Sarge.
I've been very diligently looking at this camera, so I won't be impolite to the people I'm talking to. And we mentioned this before, where I got to turn to the left to talk to you guys if I'm going to be polite to you, but I'm not polite to these people. And all of a sudden, I look over here, and there's nobody. How long have I been talking to myself?
Sorry, I flashed out, and as I got back in, I saw Sean laughing, and I knew I'd missed something funny. So,
well, you're just going to have to watch the podcast. That's all there is to it.
I hope that in 100 years, they've at least got some better technology for doing podcasts.
Amen.
And we'll do a hologram sitting in Sean's living room.
If we're going to do that, we might as well do it out in the Rockies or something.
Yeah, actually, I do hope that we're able to have one of these chats filming at the Maple Sugar Camp, or
that'd be fun
at one of the things at your place. Nathanael, I got to tell you, you're living my dream. You're living what I wanted to do when I was your age and wasn't able to. So, yeah, I live vicariously.
Well, I don't get to do as much of it as I'd like to, but hopefully I'll get a little bit more under my belt while I still can.
Well, I'm talking about raising my children on a farm in the woods. That's how I was raised.
Gotcha.
And,
yeah.
I just
Me too.
I wasn't able to give my kids that. So yeah, I live vicariously through you that way.
Fair enough.
Thanks for asking us, asking me. Thanks for asking Nathaniel. I do enjoy these talks. We should do them more. So yeah, thanks for asking. I had a good time. I hope everybody who watches has a good time as well.
I had fun
you guys
too.
coming
Thanks for
on.
having us.
Now, those of you who are listening on the podcast or watching this on YouTube, make sure to check out Sarge Vining channel on YouTube. It's literally called Sarge Vining. Nathaniel's is Early 20th Century Adventures on YouTube. He's got some really good
20th Century
videos on there.
Adventures.
And both of these gentlemen, 20th Century Adventures, not early 20th. So 20th Century Adventures. And both of them during this podcast mentioned they got some really good stuff coming up. So make sure to subscribe to their channel so you don't miss it. And both of them have some Facebook pages. So with Sarge, you got Bannerman's.
Bannerman's Camp.
Was Bannerman's Camp. And then Nathaniel's, yours is Amalgamated Order of Motor Campers. That was a mouthful
Correct.
for a second there. But yeah. But check out both of them. It's great stuff. These guys have so much knowledge and so many different interests that they bring to the table. And they're the friendliest people you could get to meet and get to know. And any questions that you have, they're always willing to lend an ear and give some advice and some suggestions. So, gentlemen, you guys really are top notch. I really appreciate you.
Well, you are too.
Again, Sean, thanks for asking. Like I said, I've had a good evening.
Thanks,
Me
guys.
too.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
You guys have a great night.
You too.
Adios.